expect the worst. Some drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst.
Here we follow a sleazy American smuggler who, along with his girlfriend, is tipped off by a dying man about a secret worth millions. And this leads him to the powerful and wealthy Mr. Arkadin, played by Welles as a bearded Russian with a very complicated past, and a past in which many of the people we are introduced to start showing up murdered. And strangely, he hires this sleazy smuggler to investigate himself.
That's the subject of the confidential report, is of a guy who has a unknown missing past. For some reason, he can't recall his early dealings in Eastern Europe. And he hires this main character to try and find out. And this becomes an international mystery of a sort as he jet sets around from one European location to another European location. Well, he jets around from one location to another, seeing a succession of ever more bizarre and mysterious figures.
So, yeah, this seems to be Welles's most episodic film as we're jaunting from set piece to set piece.
And the collection of set pieces and the collection of characters really, to me, gives off a vibe of Coen Brothers. Specifically, those Coen Brothers comedies, when they try to actually make things deliberately make comedies. Like, if you really like that sense of, like, Big Lebowski, of just seeing a collection of increasing oddballs engaging in ever more weird situations, you might find some stuff to like about Mr. Arkadin, because there is a good collection of them. One of my favorites is a guy who is talking about a sinister brothel while showing a flea circus to our main character.
Yeah, and a little bit later, Michael Redgrave plays a very eccentric, possibly an exaggerated period read on homosexuality at the time.
Well, I think he has a moo-moo, for one thing.
Right, yeah. Antique dealer who gets into this really odd negotiations with the main character for some MacGuffin or another, but unlike Othello, which, although it was filmed over such a long period with such a small budget, it still holds together. To me, this is probably Welles's weakest effort and seems the most disjointed. You have all these elements that might look good individually, like a costume party with costumes that look like they're right out of the Scarlet Empress.
Right, or Eyes Wide Shut.
Yes. And Welles is great as Arkadin himself. But for me, the movie never comes together to become the kind of mystery that would be satisfying.
Yeah, that's a bit of a shame, because Arkadin is a really fascinating guy. I mean, he's like, for one thing, he has a really, really unique look. He has this hairstyle where it's like incredibly straight, but then he has this very long and curved, flowing, bushy beard. So I was trying to look, what kind of look is that? And it just occurs to me, oh my God, you know what? That's like a vertical mullet. Arkadin is business on top and all party on the bottom.
And Russian all over.
Yeah. And he has a lot of manifestation at certain parties. Like, there's one party where he shows up as the Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. He has a great costume for the costume party you mentioned earlier. And Welles, I think, is fairly successful at having Arkadin as a character sort of inhabit two different parts, like the Coen Brothers comic part of where he's a buffoon in certain moments. But then also, he can be a malevolent figure who can like appear at the most unfortunate places for our erstwhile hero and at the most unlikely times.
Right, it's like for a character who was developed in the process of the Harry Lime series, you feel like Wells might be trying to create another Harry Lime in this character.
Yeah, I can see that totally.
He doesn't reach those heights in any way, but even the intro to the film shows that he definitely is having a lot of fun setting this character up. He shows this plane and asks us to contemplate, why would this plane be flying through the sky with no passenger in it?
Right. The ultimate example of the missing person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that footage harkens back a little bit to Kane in the sense that it looks like this newsreel footage, but then Wells also traffics in like these very, very expressionistic ones, like where a person goes into a dark courtyard and then the camera pulls back to show that this courtyard is smaller and smaller in the distance of what appears to be an endless tunnel of darkness. And there's a scene where our erstwhile hero is trying to go and meet Arkadin for a rendezvous at this party, and the party is depicted in this incredibly kinetic manner where the camera is zooming around sofas and in through rooms, and Arkadin has to be somewhere in this crazy apartment, but our hero can't find him.
And it's interesting you mentioned Kane, because the device of Arkadin asking for himself to be investigated leads to scenes where the smuggler protagonist basically seems to be taking on the role of the news on the march guy in Kane to try to uncover these mysteries of the guy's life.
With his, as you mentioned, he has a girlfriend that tries to aid him in insinuating himself into Arkadin's circle. And it actually also leads to a scene that's interesting in where she has an argument with a drunken argument conversation with Arkadin on a boat, and yet the camera seems to always be tilting at an angle different to the way the boat is tilting, different to the way that people are tilting. And it's just this great way of how like people's placement is just making a very uncomfortable, almost makes you seasick, to be quite honest.
So I think, even at his least, Wells continues to view filmmaking as the greatest toy train set a boy ever had. And it's not always going to end up in a masterpiece, but it is always going to look incredible. You're always going to be very aware that the man behind the camera is trying to do something special.
That's right. Yeah, he gives you some real fun stuff to view in every scene. Like there's just a place where our main protagonist is relating the story, is this kind of, has this wonderful dilapidated sense where snow is periodically falling, and then you see these people outside who are playing a mournful melody, almost seems just for them, and they are almost as microscopic as both the dots from the distance of the Ferris wheel from the third man and from the fleas as related over the course of the story. And Redgrave's antique store could almost be a character and a personality of its own right, because there's such a great collection of weird bric-a-brac going on, from telescopes that are missing their lenses to an entire crocodile being suspended from the ceiling. There's a great point of sale, right?
Yeah. So for everything that's going on in this film, there was still a chance for it to work, except for the performance of our lead.
He is the number one reason why Arkadin, for all the creativity and for all the areas that have a demented charm, almost all of it gets negated into a slog of an experience by one of the most stunted, wooden, obnoxiously bland and lame performances I've ever witnessed. Something about which is worse than even stuff like that Craig Wasson and Aaron Taylor Johnson do. People who, those guys are imbued with like an anti-charisma where like you see them and you automatically start being less interested in whatever the hell they're doing because they're on screen. But the guy playing the main character is somehow even worse. He's a cross between somebody that Wells met at a party and says, hey, you want to be in a movie? You're tall enough. And lackey number 5 in a gangster film. You know, if you ever see the guy in the gangster film who goes, yeah, boss, should I do this, boss? Should I do that, boss? Like that guy, the kind of annoying dude where then has the boss explain what his scheme is going to be. Okay, imagine the delivery of every single line that way.
I have my own cross version for this guy as well. I looked at him as a cross between Ralph Meeker's character from Kiss Me Deadly.
Oh, yeah, right.
Without the charisma.
Yeah.
And former Man Show host Adam Carolla.
Oh, really? Yeah, because he has Carolla's voice. Because he does have it like that. He does sound like that.
He's a mug. You know, he's basically basically the guy who should be playing third hood from the left.
Yes.
But somehow he's the lead.
That's right. Exactly. And he is unfortunately our narrator and our guide through this world of Arkadin. And his annoying sense of mugdom. That's a perfect word to describe him. He is a mug. Actually, I would go a little further and say he's a cross between a mug and a schmuck. He's a schmug. He's a schmug. This schmug wears out his welcome in, I think, record time. It took me just 10 minutes for me to already be sick of him, and yet there was the rest of the movie to go through. And so by the time he's running around the city looking for some goose liver to eat at Christmas, I was just like, oh, for the love of God, will this movie just end?
Yeah, so even if the film came together as well as intended, which it didn't, he'd still be stuck with this performance. But making things even more complicated is the fact that there is no single official version of this film. It was unfinished, and what ended up being put together at various stages are 7 different edits of the film, 3 of which are currently available on the Criterion Collection edition. So there's no official version. We have the opportunity to watch any of the 3 versions on the discs and decide for ourselves.
You know, it gets me to thinking that maybe part of the reason that this is such a less successful collection of different things, whereas Othello worked so much better by comparison, maybe part of that is that Othello was written by William Shakespeare, and Arkadin was written by Orson Welles. And a lot of sequences in the film kind of seem like a very much of an indulgence. That train set thing you mentioned earlier is just something where Welles wanted to go nuts in a particular direction and indulge his own interest, but his indulgences turned in a totally different direction. Like, one thing that notes that, like, that similarity to Kane is really interesting, you know, of a mysterious, all-powerful figure and of a person's inadequacy and seeing what that is really like, you know. Also in Kane, both main characters are not present at the very last moment.
Yeah, at times it seems like between the Kane references and the Third Man references and some noirish elements, he's hitting here on a lot of themes that would continue to interest him.
And that includes this kind of mania that underlines so much of Arkadin, how also similar to The Third Man, about how the environment seems so fraught with some sort of deranged sensibility, the sense of things not being appropriate, the sense of things falling out of control, the things that people have to do to kind of maintain some sense of control and order. But those elements just become much more rewarding, in my opinion, in his next film, Touch of Evil, in 1958.